my class the other night. Forgive me, I'm just going to be repeating myself here briefly. But I just wanted to introduce myself for folks who may not know me. This is sort of, I haven't really taught or really done anything like this for Region 1 or on this scale before, so I'm a little nervous. Bear with me as I sort of stumble through. But I have been singing in Sweet Adelines for I think 8.5 years. I joined Coastline Show Chorus when I was 16, and I've been in Region 1. I've been in Coastline ever since. I sing tenor with Carried Away Quartet in Region 1, and I am the tenor section leader for Voices United Mixed Chorus, who's unaffiliated, but operates sort of in the area. And I'm very happy to be here. I graduated with a bachelor's in music and a graduate certificate in vocal performance. So that's kind of my background. And I'm going to be talking about sight singing today. So again, sort of bear with me. I'm not sure where folks are coming from in terms of their background and reading ability and things. I'll try to make things sort of as basic as possible, just so everyone's kind of on the same page. But I'm going to share my screen here. My sound. Great. Okay. Let's present this. Can everyone see this? Yes. Great. Okay, so I'll get started because we have a lot of ground to cover today, actually, a ton of ground to cover. So sight singing, an intro. So what is sight singing? It might be self-explanatory to a lot of folks, but again, just so we're on the same page, sight singing is basically being able to look at a piece of music and sing or audiate your part without hearing it beforehand. Audiate just means singing it in your head, like seeing a pitch and knowing what that pitch sounds like in your head without actually singing it. A lot of definitions of sight singing say, you sing it on the spot, which is true, but that sort of, in my opinion, erases a lot of the processes that sort of have to happen before you actually sight sing, which we're going to be talking about today. So sight singing doesn't necessarily happen in real time. There's not, most often, unless you're maybe in an audition or something, someone won't slap a piece of music in front of you and be like, read it right now. There are steps that can be taken, even if you're just in a rehearsal setting, really quick, you can look over the music just to make your sight singing more successful. So why should I learn how to sight sing when I have learning tracks available? Because obviously in this hobby, we use learning tracks. A lot of folks on the risers maybe don't know how to read music, which is great, and they do great. A lot of really successful folks don't even read music, which is fine. So technically, you don't have to learn how to sight sing, but building this skill will grow your musicianship, make you a more intuitive singer. It'll sort of give you background for so many more things. You'll be able to recognize mistakes more clearly and more quickly. It'll help those around you on the risers, because if you know what you're talking about, if you know what you're singing and you can sing it pretty confidently, even if it's a new piece of music, everyone else around you is going to benefit from that. Plus, we're all geeks here this week, and we want to learn some geeky stuff. So here we are. So there are a couple sort of, I don't want to say prerequisites to sight singing, but just some basic sort of baseline knowledge that will be helpful in your sight singing. And these are skills that maybe some of us are new at, but it just takes skill building and practice, and it can be a little daunting at first, but we will sort of work to build that. Again, it just takes time. So sort of step number one is, knowing the major and minor scales. In barbershop, obviously we sing in major keys most of the time, but it is useful to know the minor, sort of how minor scales work, how to recognize them, how to spot their key signatures and things, because maybe a song begins in minor or has a minor passage or modulates somewhere. So it is useful to sort of know that. So we should know how to sing a scale a cappella, which great, we got that down. In tune, which generally like we sing scales in warm-ups, right? We've all done 1 1 2 1 1 2 3 2 1, right? That's all just scale stuff. So generally we all know how to do that with solfege or scale degrees. So what I mean by scale degrees is just like I just said, the number. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 7 6 5 4 3 2 1 is one way to sing the scale. Or you can use solfege, which of course is the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. Either one is valid. We'll be using solfege today, but if that's something that trips you up, feel free to use numbers. Feel free to use even like a neutral syllable like do, 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 la, 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 whatever. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's see. So the scale, that's sort of step number 1, which a lot of us have that sort of knowledge already. Step number 2 is sort of knowing how to read the note names on the staff, which again, this sort of like what Angie was talking about before, this is sort of it's a new language of sorts. So it does come with practice, definitely. So this is kind of the more like sort of nitty gritty stuff that will come with time. But generally with the exercises that we'll be doing, the notes sort of move in a stepwise motion. And what I mean by that is all of the notes are next to each other on the scale. So we're really just singing different chunks of the scale up and down. So they don't make huge leaps or anything. That's not like the interval work that maybe you just did with Angie. So there'll be more basic sort of exercises, but you can kind of see where the line contours and goes up and down. So just looking at the music will be useful, even if maybe you're still a little unsure about note names and things. So step number 3 is knowing and learning how to read basic rhythmic values and rest durations. So this is, I think, one of the trickiest parts of sight singing sometimes can be rhythm, because I think people underestimate how hard rhythm is, but rhythm is so hard. Even like really seasoned sight singers like myself trip up on rhythms constantly. So this is sort of a big chart that you can see. Also, all of these like graphics that I'm posting on the slides, I think Angie mentioned musictheory.net, and I plug it in literally every class that I teach because I think it's just such a great free website. It's really informative and really clear. So this is sort of a breakdown of what we'll be working with pretty much only from 8th notes up. We won't be going into 16th notes today for the exercises that we're going to be looking at. But it is useful to know, the whole note, 4 beats, split up into 2 half notes. Half notes, are split up into 2 quarter notes, and quarter notes are split up into 2 eighth notes. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later on as well. Okay, and step number 4 is recognizing different time signatures and key signatures. So knowing what these sort of symbols mean. So in the case of time signatures, there's not a picture here, but we'll see in our sort of examples, most of them are going to be in 4/4 or common time, which is called common time because it's the most common time signature that's used in like modern music, meaning that there are 4 beats in the measure and the quarter note is each of these beats, right? And we'll talk about that more again later. So recognizing those time signatures and also the key signatures, and sort of here's a chart down here so you can sort of visualize that. I know sometimes like I'll go into sight singing a piece. I'll be like in church in front of a congregation and I'll just totally disregard the time signature and key signature and be like, all right, I'm going to sing it. And then like 3 measures in, I'm like, okay, this is in 6/8. I've been doing this all wrong. So this is a very important step. So in the case of key signatures, most often, again, in barbershop, especially, the key is going to be in a major key. However, it is good to know the relative minor of these keys. And I know there was a whole key signature class, so maybe this is familiar to folks who went to that. but knowing how to recognize the minor keys as well, because when you are sight singing and you've never heard the piece, maybe you don't necessarily know if it's in major or if it's in minor. So the key signature that's there, say it's in the key of D or it has two sharps, that could either be in the key of D or it could be in the key of B minor, right? And the quick way to tell that is if you sort of go on the staff to like the note D to do, if you just go down one line or down one space, so you skip basically down a third, that's where the relative minor starts. So in the key of C, no sharps or flats. If you just go down a third to A, it's the key of A minor. Does that make sense to folks so far? Does anyone have any questions about any of that right now? No? I know we're kind of blowing through all this stuff. I know it's like a lot of info, but yeah, okay. So next up is just practice. After you sort of have this knowledge, this baseline knowledge that maybe you're still developing, which is great. This sort of will help you develop those skills as well. So you have the prerequisite knowledge to sight sing. Now what do? We can't expect to get it all correct on the first, second, or maybe even third tries. Even seasoned sight singers make mistakes all the time. Like I was saying before, sight singing is a hard thing to do. So it does take a couple tries, even for like professionals, to, really get in the swing of things. So you can practice using online resources. There's a ton, if you just Google like sight singing exercises, there's a ton of really just easy like 4-measure phrases that you can work on. You can play the excerpt and stuff. So online, the internet's a great resource, obviously. Another resource, if you have access to church hymnals, which maybe you do, maybe you don't, even outside of like sort of this religious context, if you're not religious, I've done a lot of church jobs. Like in college, I would sing at a lot of churches and I'd have to go in and like have these hymnals ready and within like 15 minutes be ready to like sing this new music I'd never seen before. And I think church hymnals are excellent for sight singing practice just because the melodies are written to be easy because a whole congregation has to sing them and pick up on them pretty quickly. So they're written to be easy, but they're also written to be singable and like make sense. Whereas sometimes sight singing exercises online are just like, okay, I'm going to plug in this really simple melody that maybe doesn't sound great, but it's easy. So church hymnals will sort of give you a better understanding about how like actual music works and how to sight sing that. So I know, like, again, outside of any sort of religious thing, if you have access to church hymnals, I think they're a great resource. Chorus music, quartet music, I would stay away from for now if you're a beginner, because barbershop's all about like accidentals and all this crazy stuff. Maybe if you're a lead, you can try, doing just a lead line. But barbershop music's very difficult to sight sing right off the bat anyway. It's something you can build up to, but there's a ton of other sort of easier chorus music that I'm sure you can find online or other exercises and such. So with that being said, let's see where we're at. Okay, so before you start sight singing, you can evaluate the music with these following steps. So you can do this. This will sort of become, these steps that I'm about to outline will become quicker with time. So the more practice you have with sight singing, the more this will become like really super fast. Like, okay, I'm looking at all of this. But this is sort of the stuff you have to do before you jump right into sight singing. So here are the steps for successful sight singing. Step number 1, like I said before, identify the key and the time signature. That's like step 1. Because again, if you skip it, like I have done many times in my life, because I'm like, I got this. It's just a disaster. So identifying the key and the time signature. And we'll talk about how you can identify sort of whether something is in major or if it's in minor. It won't always be super clear like it is in the examples that we're using, but a lot of the time it will be. So identify the key and the time signature just so you know where your beats are. That's step one. Step two is something I like to do. I didn't find this in any sort of resource, but this is just like me sort of injecting my opinion into this class. Is something I like to do is run through the scale using movable do. So maybe you've heard movable do before, maybe you haven't, but there are sort of, in the music world, there are two sort of different schools of thought. One is called fixed do, which basically means that C, the note C, middle C, or any octave above or below that, is always do, no matter what key you're in. So that's great if you're in the key of C, and it's great for like ear training stuff and memorizing pitch. However, if you're like in the key of D, instead of singing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, you'd have to be like re, mi, fi, sol, la, ti, do, and or re, it doesn't make sense. So especially with sight singing, fixed do is like a no-no. Movable do means that do is just the tonic in whatever key you're singing in. So if you're in the key of G, G is do. If you're in the key of A minor, A is do, etc. So we use this in chorus constantly with like warm-ups and stuff. When we're doing 1, 1, 2, 1, all of that stuff, we, go up a half step, and the 1 and the 2s are all the same. The tonic changes, or the tonic changes when we go up, but the syllables do not change. So it's a concept that we use all the time, but maybe don't have like a name for. But I'll sort of go into how to wrap your head around like, okay, I'm in the key of G. How do I sort of adjust my understanding of the scale so that G is do? And that'll, again, become easier with time, if that makes sense. And the third step is to quickly sort of go through the music, and you don't need to even hear anything for this. You can, and that this will become easier with time again, because you'll sort of recognize where your weak spots are, maybe your blind spots are in sight singing. You just spot check the music for any potential problem areas that could come up. Like, is there a leap in the line? Maybe if you're still a little shaky on intervals, that's something you would look for. Or maybe if you're still not great, not the best at singing accidentals and sort of wrapping your mind around like sharps and flats, that's something you can watch out for. Are there any tricky rests or rhythms that I have to look for? So this will be sort of personal to the singer, but it is, especially when you're starting out, good to sort of just look through the music really quick and be like, what could possibly trip me up just right off the bat? Because especially if you're singing a whole song, if you already have those those spots in mind, you can even just skip over them at the first time you're singing through, just so you're not reading it in real time and you see it and you're tripping over it, and then you have like 3 measures where you have to catch up with everybody else. If you're aware of the spot where you're like, oh, that's going to be tricky, you can, if it's going to be too much, you can just skip over it and then come back to it later. So you're not playing catch up. For rhythm issues, count singing, I find, is really useful. Count singing is something that maybe you've used in choruses, or maybe you haven't. It is a pain in the butt. And like every singer I've ever encountered, every choir I've ever been in, always hates count singing when the director's like, okay, we're going to count sing this. But everyone agrees it's super helpful when sort of going over a tricky rhythm or something. So by count singing, we'll go over this too. Instead of singing the notes, and like instead of singing the words on the notes, or even you don't even have, there are different ways to do it. You don't necessarily have to sing it the first time. If I were singing the national anthem, if I were like count singing the national anthem, there's a pickup. So it would be 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1. So it's tricky, especially if you've never done it before. But again, you don't have to sing the pitches. You can just speak the rhythms, whatever the case may be. If you see a tricky rhythm, speaking it or count singing it will sort of cause your brain to like conceptualize it better if you're isolating it. Does all that make sense so far to people? Does anyone have questions before we jump into some examples?
I do.
Yes, Jean.
So if you're told that something is in the key of A flat, does that mean A flat is do?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, good question. And generally, like, if we say something's in the key of D or the key of like E flat or whatever the case may be, it's generally assumed, and you probably all know this already, but it's generally assumed that that's just in major. Some people say like specify D major, but since most music is in major, it's just, you know, it's accepted that if we just say it's in D major, unless we specify that it's in D minor. Sort of the specification is there when we are in a minor key. Cool. Anyone else? We're good to move on. Great. I'm looking through all the scrolling through. Okay, cool. So let's start with some really basic exercises. Okay. Let me minimize my thing here. Okay. So this is just a really simple 4-measure phrase. Let me pull up my piano here on my phone so that I can get a pitch for us. Do. Okay, so I'm gonna have to get that again. It's fine. Okay, so let's go through our process. This sort of 3-step process that we have been given again here. Identify the key, run through the scale, and spot check any problem areas. So really quick, most of the exercises that we're going to be in are in the same key and the same time signature, just for ease. So we can see no sharps or flats. We're in the key of C, just to make it easy for folks. And we're in 4/4 time. Like I said before, common time is sort of the one we can wrap our brains around most easily, just because it's so widely used. So we know that we can see we have quarter notes here for most of the exercise. So that's going to be our beat. So if we're going 2, 3, 4, that's our beat here, right? Cool. So we have that. We can sort of run through the scale using movable do, even though we're in the key of C. We have do, re, mi, fa, and then we know that, you know, G is sol, A is la, B is T, and C is do. So you can kind of see, and I'll do this with the later exercise where you can kind of sing through the melody just using the scale out of time. You don't even have to, you know, you don't have to add rhythm in till later, but that'll be clearer in one of the later exercises. So we have our key, we have our do. We know that do is this one is C, and we have the solfege down at the bottom to help you out. If you're not a solfege person, I would challenge you to try solfege just because I think it's useful. But if you're more of a numbers person, if maybe you've been taught a tag and you see people doing all these crazy things with their fingers trying to like teach different scale degrees, that's the same thing as solfege. It's just a visual aid. So if you're a numbers person, feel free to try it on numbers. And if it's tripping you up totally, just sing it on la 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 or do 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 do, whatever you want. As long as the pitches are correct, that's really what matters, right? So I just did a lot of talking, so I need my pitch again. Oops. Do. This is C. If you can do the low one, by all means do the low one. I cannot. Let's sing this. We'll just sing this together. I'll count you in for 4, and then we'll just give it a go and see how it is. So everyone try it with me on mute if you don't mind. 1, 2, ready, go. do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, mi, fa, sol, sol, la, ti, do, off. Cool. So yeah, stepwise motion, like I said before, everything's just sort of following the scale, just in different chunks. There are no leaps or anything. How did we do with that? Pretty okay? Yeah,
Pretty easy.
pretty easy. Yeah. Great. Awesome. Okay, let's move on then. Oh, we got a chat. Hold on. Are you supposed to be seeing the music? Yes. Can you not see my screen now?
We can see it.
I see you. Not
Oh.
the
No, I can see it. I can see the music.
Oh, I think maybe it's a Zoom thing. Here, one moment. Let's try this. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and then I'm gonna start sharing it again. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Sorry about that. Oops. That's the first one. Here's the second one. Okay, great. All right, so here's number 2, exercise number 2. So we'll sort of go through our process again. We don't have to do it as, we don't have to take as much time with it now because we can see there's no sharps or flats. We know it's in the key of C. Also, I forgot to mention this before. We know it's in the key of C major and not A minor because we can see the exercise starts on C and it ends on C as well. So usually especially for these sorts of simple things, that's a pretty good indicator that it's in C as opposed to A minor. It won't always be that intuitive, but there are sort of clues in the music. It starts on C, ends on C. It's probably in C. It's in 4/4 again, so we'll take our same tempo that we were doing. And we sort of have a concept of what the scale is already. So let's look through and look for any sort of spots that we might trip up on. So the thing I would notice immediately is these 2 eighth notes, because the last exercise were just quarter notes. This is a new rhythm that maybe we haven't encountered. So that's going to be something different. So if I were to isolate just measure 3, I could say in my brain, okay, 2 eighth notes equal 1 quarter note. If this is my B, 2, 3, measure 3 would be 1 and 2, 3, 4, right? So I have that 1 and 2, 3, 4. So now I have what that rhythm sounds like in my brain. So now it won't trip me up when I get to it, or maybe it won't trip me up as bad. Cool. So let's try this one with a little spicy eighth notes thrown in. There's do, do, if you got the low one. Do, 1, 2. Oh, actually, for this one, I'm just going to snap. Do it without me first, see how you do, and then we'll sing it all together again. 1, 2, ready, just you. Cool. How did we do? Thumbs? Good. Cool. Great. All right. Let's do it together just real quick, just so we can check our work. Oh, I keep doing that. There's do. 1, 2, ready, go. Do, re, mi, fa, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, do. Off. Cool. Great. And another thing, it'll depend on the music. This is something that I tend to do. Like I want to cut this do off early. I don't want to hold it for the full 4 beats. is something I'm like, in my brain, I have to be like, okay, I have to hold this for the whole duration. There's no rest on the end. So that's just something to be aware of. Okay, so let's do a little bit a longer one. This one's twice as long. It's 8 measures. And you can see there are no solfege syllables on the bottom. There's also the bass clef here. This isn't 2 parts. This is the same part, just an octave apart. So there are no harmonies here except for like unison octaves. But if you're maybe a bass or a bari and you want to brush up on your sort of bass clef reading skills, that is there for you as well. On the next slide, so I'll do sort of the same thing. You guys can try this one by yourself, and then I'll put the solfege syllables on the screen just to help you out. And again, if you end up singing like do, re, mi, 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 if you like mess up the solfege, but the pitches are there, you have an awareness and a knowledge of what the pitches are. That's the only important thing. If you mess up the words, whatever, as long as the pitches are there for these purposes. That's what's important, is that you have a knowledge of sort of where that's going on. So cool. So once again, 4/4 time, C major. We know this starts on C, ends on C. We have all that sort of knowledge. So now what we have to look for is maybe areas that might trip us up. And this is a pretty straightforward one, it looks like, again. So we have, again, this sort of stepwise motion, no leaps. This tripped me up at first, because there actually is one leap in this exercise, but it's hard to see because it's from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. So if you're not looking at it linearly, it can sometimes be hard to like recognize where those leaps are. But you can see on the end of measure 4, we're on a G, and at the beginning of the measure 5, we leap down to C. So in the case of like a leap like that, maybe you're looking at it and going like, okay, it's a fifth. I know what a fifth sounds like. But if not, you could go, do. I lost the do. We'll just say this is do for now. You could say, okay, do, re, mi, fa, sol. Measure 4 ends here. Sol, fa, mi, re, do is where I have to get back to. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, do, sol, do. And you can kind of go back and forth in your head. That's kind of how I like to do that. If I'm struggling with an interval, and having a knowledge of do, where do is, and knowing like what pitch that is like super important in sight singing. So even if you get lost, as long as you can find do again, perfect. Let's see, maybe another thing you'd watch out for in measure 7, there's like some repeated notes here. There are 2 G's where mostly we've been moving up and down for each different note, but these 2 are repeated notes. Maybe that's something you would look for, so you don't mess that up. Do, do, do. Let's try this. So you all try it first, and then I'll try it with you in the next slide. 1, 2, ready, go. Measure 5. Off. Cool. We do okay? Thumbs up, thumbs middle, thumbs down. Yeah, okay? Sure. Cool. All right. So take a second before we move to the next slide. Take a second on where you think you may have slipped up, or maybe a place you got stuck. Just take a second, look over the music, just see, okay, what can I do better this time? Where are my sort of problem spots, and how can I fix them? Cool. So this is the same piece of music, it just has the solfege syllables on it. So let's just try it one more time, and we'll try it together. I think that's do. Forgive me if it's not. Do. 1, 2, ready, go. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, mi, fa, sol, do, 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 Did we do better that time? How did we do? Better? Great. Very cool. Okay. And let's see. Whoops. Yeah, our next one's the tricky one. Okay, so let's see. How much time we have? Like 20 minutes left. Cool. So before we move on to sort of our like level 5, like the next exercise is a bit trickier just for the sake of having it in there. It is a couple levels above, so don't, if it's not, whatever, it's fine. I just put it in just for the sake of like showing you the differences of like different keys and different time signatures and stuff. But before we sort of get to that, I want to make sure we hit any like questions or comments or concerns, or maybe anything that anyone has in our last couple minutes. Anyone? No? Cool. Okay. Oh, just kidding. Singing solfege notes trips me up. Used to sing. Oh, the note names. Yeah. So like singing like C, D, E, F, G, that kind of a thing. That kind of thing is totally acceptable as well. So I know it's difficult when I'm singing the solfege, just for the sake of like singing what's on the page, because I took these from like a sight singing website. But if it's easier for you to sort of try to tune me out and just listen to the pitch maybe, or whatever, you can totally sing the note names. Whatever is useful to you is what I want you to use. Like, I'm not saying like you have to use solfege. I do think solfege is great. I'm a solfege kind of gal, but just because I'm a solfege kind of gal doesn't mean you all have to be solfege kind of gals. So yeah, whatever's useful, I think that's great. Cool. All right, let's move on to this last exercise that I have. And I would like, so this is sort of, since it's a little trickier, we'll sort of go through our process, but I want to do it together. So feel free to, if you have an answer, just take yourself off mute, shout it out, write it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with doing. But I want to hear from you. So let's do this together. So we have this, again, 8 measures. So same length as last time. Where we have to, step 1, determine our key and our time signature. So we have 1 sharp. So what key are we in?
G.
G. I'm trying to keep an eye on chat too. G, yes. So we know it could be either G major or E minor, but we can see it begins on a G and it ends on a G. So we can pretty confidently say that it's in the key of G. And the time signature, we see it's in 3/4. So would anyone like to venture a guess as to what that means or want to explain?
3 beats to a measure, the quarter note gets 1 beat.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Jane. So this is exactly sort of the same tempo that we've been using before. This is our quarter note, right? But this time, instead of being 4, there's 3. It's more of a bump, 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 1, 2, 3. Whenever I switch from 4/4 to 3/4, it's always like, whoa, like, where am I? So in my head, I like to just kind of do a little 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, just to get that like waltz feel. We won't go that fast, but this is sort of 1, 2, 3. That's sort of the feel that we're going for this one, is those 3 beats per measure. Cool. So step 2, we have to sort of use movable do to go through and sort of gain an understanding of like what solfege or numbers or whatever you're using, sort of gain an understanding of like what's going on here. So what I like to do in these sort of cases, sort of like what I was doing before, you can see like do, sol, I think that's a G. Sol, sol. Maybe you're down here or up here. You can see we start on G. That's do. A is re. B is mi. C is fa. D is sol. Fa. B is mi. Re. So what I'm doing here, you can kind of see, is that I'm taking the rhythm like totally out of it. And in my head, I'm just going, okay, do, there's re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re. And then on the second line, same thing, do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do. So now I have the contour of the melody in my head already. I just have to sort of do the rhythms in real time. But I sort of have the solfege syllables that I'm going to be using in my head, and I sort of know, I've mapped which notes sort of go to those. If you're using note names, that's great too, because you can see, especially if you have a background in reading music and stuff, you can you just see the note and be like, okay, that's a D. So it's an easier transition maybe. I do like having the connection to do just to put it in sort of a context of a key. But whatever works for you is perfect. So does that make sense what I kind of just did? Like taking the rhythm out of it and just sort of getting the names? Yeah. Great. So that's something you could do to sort of map the movable do sort of situation. Because again, we've been working in C and now we're in G, so we're like, whoa. Cool. So now we just have to like map out and look at some maybe spots that we might trip up on. It doesn't look like there are any leaps, but there are some rests, there are some eighth notes. Does anyone have any spots that maybe you're going to watch out for when you sing this? If anyone would like to share, that's okay. If not.
The rests.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the rests. Oops. Spoilers. Yes, the rests are going to be important to watch out for. So like measure 2, stop doing that. Measure 2 has a rest at the end. Maybe not as difficult as the one in measure 7, which is in the middle of a measure. So we kind of have to like sing 2 in our head, like 1, 2, 3, right? So the rests are something to watch out for, certainly. Something else I would watch out for, we've kind of gained an understanding of these eighth notes now from like previous exercises, but maybe if we're still a little shaky, like maybe measure 1, you're like, okay, what does that sound like? I would go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3. If I'm kind of subdividing by the smallest note value, this is sort of a rhythm reading thing, but if you sort of like in your brain subdivide by the smallest note value, which is the eighth note, you go 1 and 2 and 3 and. So measure 1 would say 1, 2, and 3. So you have that and sort of in your brain. Same thing for like measure 5, 1 and 2 and 3 and. So that's something to watch out for, is these eighth notes as you sort of divide the beats. But other than that, yeah, it's all stepwise. We know what the melody kind of sounds like. We just have to put the rhythms in there. So cool. Anyone else have anything to add while I'm getting a pitch again?
The difference between this, the sound of the half steps and the whole steps. Like the end of the first measure going into the second measure is a half step.
Right. Yes, that is a good point. So especially if you're maybe new at reading music, sort of the distance between the notes, there's not really an indication on the written music of the distance between the notes. Visually, all the notes seem to be the same distance apart. That's a really good point, because even though they look all the same distance apart, but there are half note or half steps and whole steps sort of within that. So part of what you can do for that is, yes, going through and being like, okay, B to C, I know that's a half step. Another, C to B, I know that's a half step. Another thing you could do as you become more familiar with like movable do and working in different keys, something you'll just recognize is we know that in the major scale, me to fa or fa to me is a half step. And we know that in the key of G, B is me, F is fa. So we sort of know what that relationship sounds like already if we have sort of an understanding of this movable do and these keys and stuff. But again, this comes with like a ton of practice. So that's great. Thank you for pointing that out. Cool. Okay, so let's try this with our, we have like 10 minutes left. Perfect. Okay. Do, there's our do. Or down here, do, whatever's more comfortable for you. Do. Okay. Again, I'll let you guys try this and then we'll pop the solfege syllables on and I'll try it with you. Do, do. In 3, so I'll give you 3. 1, ready, go. All right. Was that good? Did I get all of the beats? I lost my place. How did we do? Pretty good. Middle, good. Half. Cool. All right.
Well, doing 3/4 time is definitely harder than 4/4.
It is, yeah. Especially if you're like in the mindset of 4/4. It's hard. It's
Yeah.
so hard to like get out of 4/4 when you've been operating in 4/4. It is hard to get the feel of it down. But we're gonna do it again. So again, sort of take a second. I'll pop the solfege up here. Take a second, sort of go over what maybe a place you slipped up or a place you could do better at or something that you know.
And maybe everybody can mute. I think last time we weren't all muted.
Yes, yeah. A little oopsie, but okay. I'm wondering if there's a way. Sorry, one moment as you're sort of doing this. No. Oh, no, never mind. Okay, all right, that's fine. Okay, so, and all right, let's try this again. All together this time. Do, is that do? Hold on. Such bad pitch retention. Do. Do, I was wrong. Do, do. I'm gonna sing it up here. Okay. In 3, I'll give you 3. 1, ready, go. Do, re, re, mi, fa. Sol, fa, fa, mi, re. Do, re, mi, fa. Sol, fa, mi, re, do. Off. Cool. How did we do that time? Better? Great. Is there
It was
anything?
easier with you snapping through the whole thing.
What's that?
You're snapping through the whole thing that time helped.
Oh yes. Sorry. Yeah, that was, I wasn't sure. I miscounted.
Oh, that's
but-
okay.
yeah,
We
when
should be able to do it without you, but you know.
No, I mean that was my bad. I sometimes if I'm not singing, I lose track of like where I am in the music. Great. Okay. Was there anything maybe you noticed this time that you did better or that you improved on, or just anything? Anyone want to share anything about anything? Something they noticed? Anyone have questions or comments?
I have a question about the timing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't read music that well. So when there's a 3 over a 4 versus a 4 over a 4, I don't even pay attention to it. I just go from note to note. So I'm not even paying attention whether it's, 3 beats a measure or 4 beats a measure. So what am I doing wrong on that?
Yeah, so I think that's maybe a pretty common like thing for folks who are maybe just starting out, or maybe don't have, or yeah, maybe just don't necessarily read music as well, or don't have the practice doing it. I think that's a pretty common thing, is just be like, okay, I know sort of where my beats are, so like I can just do that, which is a valid way of doing things if you're an accurate sort of singer and can do that accurately. But I find it's usually easier to conceptualize music in sort of like phrases, and having a knowledge of like where the measure ends can kind of I think it sort of helps you like feel the music better like in your body. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe this is a little like out there or whatever. But you can sort of feel like, so a phrase in music is like a unit of maybe 4 bars, usually 4 bars, sometimes 2 bars, sometimes more or less than that. But it's sort of a standalone like phrase, a standalone piece of music that can kind of, you can like chunk it out from a larger piece of music and it sounds kind of complete in a way. So in the case of this piece of music, like the first 4 measures is sort of a phrase, and then the second 4 measures is its own phrase. So do 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 re re mi fa sol fa fa mi re. Like obviously we want the melody to go to do, but 4 measures is sort of a nice mathematical thing. It sounds good together. It feels good to us, sort of that chunk. And then the second phrase is sort of its own thing. So having a knowledge of like where the pulse is on beats 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. Yes. So pulse, sort of the pulse of the music, that's a good comment, is important too, because the pulse of the music can sort of inform like the words, it can inform the expression of a song, and it'll sort of help you just like group things together in a way that sort of makes sense and sort of feels better. So the 3/4 just means that like these strong beats, these sort of pulses, there are only 3 of them in this sort of like phrases are split up into measures. So it's sort of like these units of measurement that all sort of add up like mathematically to one another, I guess. Just having an understanding of it, I think, can help you conceptualize music in a sort of more intuitive way. I don't know if that answered your question very well. I apologize if it didn't. I know that was very rambly. But yeah, I think again, it's just something that takes time and practice, being like, okay, this is what 3/4 feels like. This is what 4/4 feels like. I know where the emphasis goes. Sort of in 3/4, again, that waltz feel is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So the emphasis is often on the first beat, which is a very different feel than 1, 2, 1, 2. Now I'm in 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So often it's sometimes on the beats 1 and 3. Sometimes it's on beats 2 and 4. It really depends on the piece of music. But yeah, so there are different ways of looking at it. Again, I'm sorry if that didn't help or I didn't answer your question, but yes. Yeah, Jean, what's up?
I think in measure 6, it's easier to hold the fa for the 2 beats since you have to sing the sol, there's no rest. But in measure 2, you have to consciously hold that note for the full 2 beats. I find that, I have to think about that. Sometimes I tend to cut it a little bit short.
Yes, I'm going to do the same thing. And for that one especially, I find that going from do, 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 we'll call this do, re, mi, fa. That's like a weird place to end on. Like we want to go up to sol, like our voice want to do that. So ending like the rest on fa, you're like, ooh, but then go to sol. So yeah, it's a weird harmonic thing that's just like built into our bones, I guess. Cool. So it is 9 o'clock. I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you all for joining me for this sort of last day of Geek Week. I hope you all had a great week. Yeah,
And Meg, thank you for being our last instructor for this first ever all virtual week. I hope everybody had a good time, and please tell your friends. We're going to be doing this again.
Yeah,
So Karen has all kinds of great ideas up her sleeve. So pass the word that it was a really fun week.
cool.
Thanks,
Sorry,
Meg.
Meg, I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought you were in between phrases. Sorry.
No, I was done. We're good. Thank you all again for joining me. Thanks for bearing with me as I went through
Great
this.
way to wrap up the week.